At 70, Denzel Washington, one of Hollywood's most respected and admired legends, faces a reality few could imagine. Behind the calm voice, the faith, and the strength he's known for, lies a story filled with pain, loss, and sacrifice that most never saw coming. What he's endured off-screen is far more heartbreaking than any role he's ever played. Those closest to him say the truth about his final years will leave fans in tears and change how you see him forever. He grew up in a small home in Mount Vernon, New York, a place filled with prayers, not laughter. Denzel Washington's childhood wasn't easy. His father, a strict Pentecostal preacher, believed that love was shown through rules, not hugs. His mother, a determined woman who owned a small beauty salon, worked long hours just to keep food on the table. Their home had faith, but it didn't always have warmth. The radio played gospel, but under the music, silence lived like another family member. When Denzel was 14, that silence became permanent. His parents' marriage fell apart quietly. No shouting, no big goodbye. One day they were a family, and the next, they weren't. His father moved out and drifted away. "We never really connected," Denzel would say years later. "When he died, I didn't cry. Not because I didn't love him, but because we never had that kind of bond." That quiet pain sank deep into him, shaping the way he looked at the world. Cautious, serious, always searching for meaning. Without his father's steady voice, Denzel started to lose his way. He hung around the wrong crowd, boys who thought trouble made them strong. Many of them didn't make it out of Mount Vernon. "They went one way," he once said, "and I went another." The reason for that was his mother. She saw where her son was heading and made the hardest choice a parent can make. She sent him away. To a teenage boy, being sent to military school felt like betrayal. The early mornings, the drills, the shouted orders, it felt cold and punishing. But what he didn't understand then was that this was her way of saving him. "My mother saved my life," Denzel said years later. "It was the best thing that could have happened to me." In that strict environment, he learned something the streets never could have taught him: self-control, focus, and the power of silence. That discipline became his language. It turned pain into purpose and confusion into drive. By the time he came back home, the streets didn't tempt him anymore. The boy who had once been lost now had direction. He didn't know it yet, but that same quiet strength, the kind born from heartbreak and discipline, would one day become the foundation of everything he was known for. Before Hollywood, before fame, before the applause, Denzel Washington was just a boy who refused to break. When Denzel Washington left Mount Vernon, he didn't carry much with him, just a suitcase, a few dreams, and the kind of determination only struggle can teach. He didn't know exactly what he wanted from life, but he knew he didn't want to stay where he was. The noise of the streets, the faces of his friends who had disappeared into trouble, all of it pushed him forward. He wanted to become something different, something that mattered. But the road ahead wasn't easy. When he first got to Fordham University, he felt lost. The city was bigger, colder, and far less forgiving than he expected. He had no money, no connections, and sometimes not even enough food. The winters in New York cut through his thin jacket, and on more nights than he liked to admit, he went to bed hungry. He worked odd jobs, cleaning floors, running trays in the cafeteria, delivering papers, anything that paid a few dollars. But even when he was tired and broke, he carried something stronger than fear: faith. His mother's lessons echoed in his head: pray when you don't know what to do, and keep moving when life tries to stop you. But faith alone didn't tell him who he was meant to be. That answer came almost by accident. One summer, he took a job at a YMCA camp in Lakeville, New York. The pay was small, the days were long, and he was just trying to save enough to help his mother. One night, the camp held a talent show. Someone asked him to fill in for a performer who hadn't shown up. Denzel wasn't interested, but they insisted. He got on stage, said a few lines, and suddenly everyone was laughing and clapping. A woman in the audience leaned forward and said, "You were born to act." It was a small moment, but for him, it felt like lightning. Something clicked inside. For the first time, he knew what his purpose was. He went back to Fordham with a new kind of energy. He switched his major to drama, started reading plays, and began studying the craft that would define his life. Acting became more than a dream. It became a mission. He was still poor, still struggling, but he had direction now. After graduation in 1977, he earned a scholarship to study acting in San Francisco at the American Conservatory Theater. It was a new world, full of creativity and competition. But the glamour people imagined wasn't real. He lived in a tiny room that smelled like dust, ate cheap food, and often went to bed hungry again. At night, he rehearsed lines by the flicker of a weak lamp, reciting Shakespeare to the walls. The wind from the Pacific seeped through the cracks in his window, and his breath fogged the air. There were days he thought about giving up, but every time doubt crept in, he remembered his mother's words. "The world's going to try to break you. Don't let it." That voice kept him going. When the money ran out, he packed his bag and went back to New York. He had no plan, just hope. He started auditioning anywhere that would have him. Most doors stayed closed. Casting directors would smile politely, say they'd call, and never did. He waited in long lines, handed out headshots, slept on friends' couches, and sometimes on the floors of small apartments filled with other dreamers. Each no felt like a door slamming on my future, he would later say, but faith kept me knocking. Then, finally, a small opportunity appeared. A part in a made-for-TV movie called Wilma in 1977. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. He poured his soul into it. That job opened another door. A few years later, he landed a role in the hospital drama Saint Elsewhere. It was steady work, and it gave him the chance to sharpen his skills. Every role, no matter how small, was a chance to learn. He studied his lines until they lived inside him. He watched people, how they moved, how they spoke, how they carried pain. Slowly, people began to notice that there was something different about him. He didn't just act, he felt. Every emotion, every silence, every look had weight. Then came Cry Freedom, and after that, Glory. When he stood on screen as Private Trip, the world finally saw what he had been building all those years. The pain, the hunger, the discipline. It was all there, carved into his performance. He wasn't pretending to suffer, he was remembering it. The applause that followed wasn't just for a great actor, it was for a man who had climbed out of silence and hardship and turned it into something beautiful. But Denzel didn't let fame get to his head. He stayed grounded, always returning to the lessons that got him there. "I pray every day," he once said. "I read my Bible. I try to keep my feet on the ground." For him, success wasn't about money or awards. It was about purpose. Every role he chose had meaning. He wanted to tell stories that spoke truth, that inspired people, that gave hope to someone who might be sitting in a dark room thinking they had no chance. He knew fame was fleeting, but faith was forever. When he finally stood on stage accepting his first Oscar, he didn't think about the lights or the cameras. He thought about his mother, about Mount Vernon, about the boy who almost didn't make it, the one who was sent away, who worked for pennies, who walked through cold streets whispering lines to himself. That boy had become a man. A man who learned that real power doesn't come from applause. It comes from perseverance, from faith, from hunger that never dies. Denzel Washington's rise wasn't luck. It was the result of years of discipline, rejection, prayer, and courage. The world saw a legend, but underneath the fame was still that boy from Mount Vernon, the one who refused to break, who turned hunger into hope, and who taught us all that greatness isn't given, it's earned. One struggle, one prayer, one step at a time. Love came quietly into Denzel Washington's life, not through fame, not through success, but through a moment that almost felt accidental. It was 1977, and he was still a young actor trying to find his way. He had just finished filming a small television movie called Wilma, a story about struggle and perseverance. On that set, between long shooting days and cheap coffee, he met a woman named Pauletta Pearson. He wasn't dazzled by his charm. In fact, his first attempts at impressing her fell flat, but she smiled anyway, a calm, knowing smile that stayed with him. Months later, fate crossed their paths again at a play in Atlanta. She arrived late, slipped into the only empty seat left, right next to him. He looked over, grinned, and thought, God's got jokes. Their first date wasn't fancy. No candlelight dinner, no expensive restaurant. Pauletta paid for her own meal, and for his too. Denzel would laugh about it for years, saying, "That's when I knew she was the one." They married in 1983, long before the red carpets and Oscar speeches, long before the world called him a legend. It was a small ceremony, simple, heartfelt, full of faith. They didn't have much back then. Their first apartment was tiny, with peeling wallpaper and rent they could barely afford. But they had love, a piano, and dreams too big to fit inside those four walls. At night, Pauletta would play gospel hymns on the piano while Denzel sat by the window, reading scripts, sometimes wondering if he'd ever make it. When their first son was born, he held the baby close and whispered, "One day, I'll make you proud." There were nights when Pauletta stayed awake with the baby while Denzel studied lines for a role that might not even come. He was chasing a future, she was holding their present together. They were a team, one chasing dreams, the other keeping the dream alive at home. As his career began to rise, the balance shifted. Long filming schedules turned into months away from home. Cry Freedom, Glory, Malcolm X, his name was everywhere. The applause grew louder, but the house grew quieter. Pauletta became the heart of the family, raising their children with grace and patience. "My wife did the heavy lifting," Denzel would admit later. "I worked, but she raised the kids." There were moments when the distance hurt. Late nights when he'd call home from hotel rooms halfway across the world, his children already asleep. Pauletta's voice was always gentle, even when tired. "We're fine," she'd say. "Just hurry home." And he would promise he would, knowing sometimes he couldn't. He missed birthdays, school plays, little moments that don't make headlines but make a life. But every time he came home, she welcomed him not with anger, but with love. That quiet forgiveness was her superpower. In 1995, after 12 years of marriage, they renewed their vows in South Africa. It wasn't about glamour, it was about grace. Under the wide African sky, surrounded by their children and close friends, they promised again to keep choosing each other, no matter what the world threw their way. Denzel later said, "That day, I realized love doesn't need perfection, it just needs patience." But even love like theirs wasn't free from pain. As life moved forward, loss began to weave its way into his story. The first heartbreak came in 1991 while filming Malcolm X. In the middle of one of the most defining performances of his career, he got the call. His father had passed away. There had been no warning, no goodbye. His father, a preacher who had filled his childhood with scripture and silence, was suddenly gone, and Denzel didn't know how to grieve. "I didn't cry," he admitted later, "not because I didn't love him, but because we never truly connected." The weight of that silence hit him harder than tears ever could. He threw himself into work, letting the pain pour out through the roles he played. Every line about fathers, faith, or forgiveness carried pieces of his own heart. It wasn't until years later that he began to understand the kind of love his father had shown: quiet, hardworking, hidden behind discipline. He didn't say, "I love you," Denzel said, but he built a life that showed it. That realization softened something inside him. He learned that love doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers, through the things left unsaid. Years later, that understanding helped him through another loss: the death of Whitney Houston. They had worked together on The Preacher's Wife and formed a deep friendship. She was radiant, kind, and fragile beneath all the fame. When news broke that she had passed away, Denzel sat in silence. "She gave everything," he said softly, "and it cost her everything." He attended her funeral quietly, sitting in the back pew, head bowed. He didn't speak, he just prayed. Watching her casket, surrounded by music and tears, he whispered, "She's free now." Then came Chadwick Boseman, another soul who had crossed his path in a way that would forever change him. Years earlier, Denzel had paid for a young actor's tuition to study at Oxford, not knowing that actor was Chadwick. He did it quietly, expecting nothing in return. Years later, when Chadwick found success, he publicly thanked Denzel, calling him his inspiration. The bond between them became one of mutual respect, a passing of the torch. So when Chadwick died in 2020, after battling cancer in secret, Denzel was crushed. He gave everything, he said through tears. He was grace. The loss reminded him how fragile even the strongest hearts can be. Through every joy and heartbreak, Denzel's anchor remained his faith and his family. Pauletta's patience, his children's laughter, his mother's lessons that still echoed in his heart. Life had tested him with fame, love, and loss, but through it all, grace carried him. He learned that love isn't about perfection, it's about endurance. It's about forgiving, holding on, and showing up even when it hurts. Now, when he talks about marriage, he doesn't talk about romance or grand gestures, he talks about prayer. "We pray more than we argue," he laughs. "That's the glue." After 4 decades, their love hums like quiet music, steady, strong, and sure. Every scar, every tear, every loss became part of the rhythm. And through it all, Denzel never forgot the lesson life kept teaching him. Real love isn't loud, it's steady. It's the grace that holds you when everything else falls away. As the years passed, Denzel Washington began to move differently. Slower, quieter, more deliberate. The man who once ran across movie sets and worked 16-hour days now took time to breathe. Fame no longer impressed him. He had seen its glare, felt its heat, and watched it fade for others. What mattered now wasn't applause, but peace. At 70, Denzel had nothing left to prove to the world, and everything left to be thankful for. He often said that time was the greatest teacher. It had taught him that success means nothing if it costs your soul. In his younger years, he chased every opportunity, saying yes to everything, never wanting to lose momentum. But now, he said yes to stillness. He woke up early, before the sun, brewed his coffee, opened his Bible, and read quietly by the window. Those moments of calm became sacred, a way of staying grounded in a world that never stopped spinning. You have to feed your spirit, he often said. If you don't, the world will eat you alive. His home in Beverly Hills wasn't the mansion people imagined. It was big, yes, but filled not with luxury, but warmth. Family photos lined the walls, gospel music drifted through the air, and laughter from grandchildren filled the halls. Pauletta still played piano in the evenings, her soft melodies blending with the hum of the city outside. Sometimes, Denzel would stand by the door, listening, not as a star, but as a husband, a father, a man who finally understood what really mattered. He often walked in his garden alone, hands in his pockets, whispering prayers under his breath. The flowers were simple, roses, jasmine, and one small tree his mother had once loved. When the wind passed through the branches, it almost sounded like her voice. "Keep walking, Denny," she used to say. "God's got you." He'd smile, look up at the sky, and whisper, "I know, Ma." In his 70s, Denzel had learned to make peace with time. He didn't fight the gray in his hair or the ache in his knees. "Aging isn't losing strength," he said once. "It's gaining peace." The long hours, the pressure, the endless noise of Hollywood, it no longer had power over him. He had built something deeper than fame. A legacy of integrity. That legacy wasn't measured in awards, though he had plenty. It was in the people he touched, often without them ever knowing. Young actors would tell stories of how Denzel gave advice on set, not about fame, but about discipline and purpose. Ease, he would say, is a greater threat to progress than hardship. He believed in doing the work, staying humble, and remembering where you came from. Fall down 7 times, get up 8, he told them. That's success. He continued to give, quietly, just as he always had. Millions donated to schools, youth centers, veterans' homes. He funded programs for young Black artists, paid tuition for struggling students, and supported charities that helped families rebuild their lives. But he rarely spoke about it. "If you're going to give," he said, "give quietly. The good will speak for itself." When asked about his wealth, the homes, the cars, the fortune he'd earned, he always shrugged it off. "You can't take it with you," he smiled, "but you can pass it on." And that's what he did. He passed on wisdom to his children, faith to his grandchildren, and opportunity to the next generation. At home, family dinners were sacred, the long table filled with laughter, stories, and prayer. His 4 children, John, David, Katia, and twins Malcolm and Olivia, all found their own paths, but they still came home often. They would tease him about being old school, and he'd laugh, pretending to be offended. "Old school keeps you alive," he'd say. Pauletta would shake her head, smiling, her hand resting on his. It was love made simple, not the kind that shouts, but the kind that stays. In the evenings, when the city lights began to glow, Denzel liked to step outside. The view stretched across Los Angeles, a skyline he had once dreamed of conquering. Now, he just admired it. "It's funny," he said once, "you spend half your life climbing the mountain, and the other half realizing the view was never the point." He thought often of the people he had lost. His parents, Whitney Houston, Chadwick Boseman. Each loss had left a scar, but also a lesson. "Love never dies," he would say softly. "It just changes form." Those memories, though painful, gave his days meaning. They reminded him to cherish the time he still had, to love louder, to forgive faster, and to live with grace. Sometimes he'd watch one of his old films and smile, not out of pride, but out of gratitude. Every role was a chapter of his life, a reflection of where he had been. Glory, Malcolm X, Training Day, Fences. Each performance carried pieces of his soul. But now, sitting in the soft glow of his home theater, he didn't see the actor. He saw the journey, the boy from Mount Vernon who once went hungry, the young man who prayed for a chance, the husband who learned patience, the father who finally found peace. He had walked through hunger, fame, loss, and grace, and somehow he had come out whole. "I'm just thankful," he said in one interview, his voice steady, his eyes kind. "I've had a good life, I've made mistakes, but I've been forgiven. That's all you can ask for." Now, when dawn breaks over Beverly Hills, Denzel Washington steps into the light, calm and unhurried. The world still calls him a legend, but he doesn't think of himself that way. To him, he's just a man trying to do good, trying to live right, trying to leave something worth remembering. His story isn't about fame or fortune. It's about faith and endurance, about learning to let time do its work without fear. The same discipline that once pushed him to greatness now keeps him grounded. The same silence that once haunted him now feels like peace. And when people ask him about the secret to his success, he always gives the same answer: grace. Just grace. Because for Denzel Washington, legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's how you live. With faith, with purpose, and with the quiet understanding that time, if you walk with it, will always lead you home.